The Northern Renaissance is the impact that all of the ideas coming out of Italy are moving themselves up northward into Europe as a result of the French invasion and the return of those soldiers back up to France. Many have also called this a bridge to the Reformation because of all the ideas and the new concepts that are coming up from Italy, coming up into Northern Europe. This is where the Reformation is going to spark, and it's going to begin here in Northern Europe. So, what made that happen, and what allowed that to be possible? Well, it begins somewhere around 1500 AD with the development of the printing press. This was, of course, created in Germany by Johann Gutenberg, and the printing press allowed for a much wider distribution of materials, and it allowed for things that are going to be published by men like Martin Luther or John Calvin or Ulrich Zwingli to be able to be distributed among the people in their vernacular language. So printing press was extremely important to the development of both the Renaissance as well as the idea of the Reformation. And as we mentioned before, the French invasion of Italy helped to move the Renaissance ideas up toward the north. I'm going to throw in an idea here that you probably will not find in your book, but I think it's important to discuss here because of our perspective from a biblical point of view. Many have also called this biblical humanism, this movement toward in the Northern Renaissance. It's an adoption of the humanities into education here. And as people begin to advance their knowledge about their studies, they're going to also conduct that into knowledge about the Bible. And so there's an emphasis here on not only ancient Greek and Roman texts and ideas, but also an emphasis on studying ancient Christianity. And that is going to bring about new ideas that people are reading the ancient texts of Scripture and they're going to realize, wait a second, that's not what the Catholic Church has been teaching us, and that's not what we should be doing according to what these ancient texts tell us. And so it begins to lead some members to reform or change ideas in the Catholic Church. Martin Luther being one of those men, and we often talk about him, but before him, Erasmus was one of the early biblical humanists. As he began to study these texts and he began to look back at the early writings of men like Paul and even going back further to Moses, he is going to recognize some serious errors in Catholic doctrine and Catholic teaching. And he begins to write about those things, and he begins to question ideas the Catholic Church had been promoting for quite some time. And so that's why Erasmus here is said to have laid the egg that Luther hatched. That many of Luther's ideas came out of the concepts or the momentum that Erasmus had begun. And so most of the biblical humanists that are going to come out of Erasmus or Luther are going to have a similar message. First of all, they're going to focus on a return to the original text of Scripture. Go back to the original Greek and Hebrew writings. In order to do that, you have to learn Greek and Hebrew. And so you're going to have to focus on understanding those languages, and then you can read what the original text is, and then you can translate it. Secondly, they're also going to focus on salvation. And they're going to say that salvation is not dependent on external actions, that you need to focus your salvation on Jesus Christ. And real religion is a personal experience, a personal relationship with Christ, and not coming through the Catholic Church. Okay, well, this is really going to take the Catholic Church some time to get used to, because everything that they've been teaching over the last 1,000 years or so has been focused on the sacraments, and you have to perform the sacraments. You have to pay homage to the Catholic Church in order to receive salvation. And so if you are going to say that you don't need the Catholic Church for salvation, people are going to have some pretty serious issues with you on that. There are a few really important biblical humanists that I want to mention here, but I'll just mention them briefly. John Colet is an English church priest, and his main focus is on teaching and translating into original languages. He works closely along with Erasmus, and so the two of them have very similar ideas and work together in order to get back to the original languages. He also worked alongside a man by the name of Thomas More. Now, Thomas More was an advisor to the King of England, Henry VIII. He was his chief advisor. Now, at this point, because we've not really studied Henry VIII a whole lot, he may not mean a whole lot to you, but later on, Henry VIII will be one of the most significant kings in English history. And so here his chief advisor was Thomas More, and Thomas More was going to write a book by the name of Utopia. And in this book, he began to write about the downfall of society and how terrible and awful society had become and how we need to inspire our society to do better. He said that we need to educate both men and women equally. That took a lot of people some time to get used to because women typically were not educated during the Middle Ages, and those that were usually only upper class or perhaps those that were dedicated to the church. And so he said we need to have universal education. We also need to have religious toleration. We need to allow people to have their own varying viewpoints on Scripture. Now, he would not agree with everybody in the way that they believed, but he said that's healthy. That sparks debate. That helps us know what we believe. And then thirdly, in the Utopia, he said that we should have economic equality, that we should not have different levels of wealth, that everybody should have equal opportunity for that. And if somebody works hard enough, they should be able to work themselves up in society. That brings us now to Erasmus. Erasmus is, I will claim, the greatest of all the biblical humanists because of all the things that he did to spark the Reformation. And I mentioned before that he led some of the ideas that Martin Luther was going to pick up and to launch the Reformation. But I think it's important to recognize Erasmus prior to that. So Erasmus, he was influenced by John Colet to learn Greek, and so he began to pursue knowledge of Greek studies. He believed that the Latin translation was defective. He did not think that the Latin version of Scripture was as accurate as it needed to be once he studied out what the original Greek said. So he wrote a brand new Greek and Latin translation that he thought was much more accurate. He also wrote a book by the name In Praise of Folly. And in this book, he criticized the monks and their behavior in the Catholic Church. And in every aspect of this book, it is a big-time criticism of the Catholic Church. And so he gets caught in the middle here between the Roman Catholic Church, which he still claimed to be a part of, as well as the new reformers that are going to go completely against the Catholic Church. So his criticism here, his In Praise of Folly, was meant to inspire change in the Catholic Church. But the Catholic Church wanted him to reverse his writings, and the reformers wanted him to create more writings like this. And he just said, whoa, wait a second. I don't want to create a big divide here. I want to be friends with everybody, but I see some issues that need to be addressed in the Catholic Church. And so for those reasons, Martin Luther is going to break apart from Erasmus and his beliefs, and we'll talk more about that in a future time. Certainly, these men had a major influence on their society as well as others around them. So the biblical humanists were the first to widely use the printing press. I mentioned Johann Gutenberg's invention. He didn't specifically create it for the biblical humanists, but they're the ones that took advantage of it. And so they developed a modern day, or something similar to our modern day tract, where they would have a pamphlet they would hand out to people explaining what they believed, and people would be able to read it in their own language. Some of the younger disciples of Colet, More, and Erasmus become Protestants, those that protest the Catholic Church. And this leads to the first wave of the Protestant Reformation. And that term here, Protestant Reformation, is literally those that are protesting against the Catholic Church. They want to see a reforming or a reformation of Catholic doctrine and Catholic ideas. And when they don't see that happening, they are going to break away and they're going to create their own stance on Scripture and their own stance on biblical Christianity.